The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. I was lying there pale and weak, but conscious, staring at the ceiling as my sister's shadow loomed over me. Then, with a smirk that made my blood freeze, she yanked the monitor cord and laughed. "You always fake being sick." I didn't flinch, I didn't scream. I just stared at her, letting her arrogance fill the room like oxygen. She thought she had broken me, but she had no idea how carefully I had been planning every silent move, every hidden thought. Her laughter bounced off the walls, sharp and cruel, but my mind was already elsewhere, calculating, observing, remembering every cruel word, every careless betrayal, every time she underestimated me. I could feel the rage bubbling under my calm exterior, a storm ready to strike, but only when the timing was perfect. I let her walk out of the room smug, thinking she had won. As the door clicked shut, I pressed my hand lightly against the sheets, imagining the precise ways this would all turn back on her, but not yet. Not now. I leaned back, my eyes following her figure retreating down the corridor, every step she took feeding the quiet storm that would make her regret underestimating me. And then I heard the faintest click of her phone on the table, a detail I would remember, a thread to pull later. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, pretending to drift in and out of sleep while my mind replayed the scene 100 times. Every detail mattered, the smirk on her face, the careless flick of her hand, the way she thought I was fragile, weak, helpless. She didn't know that weakness is the perfect disguise for power. Hours passed. The hospital lights flickered sterile and cold. Nurses came and went, speaking softly, unaware of the storm brewing behind my calm eyes. I listened. I observed. Every routine, every schedule, every way she would move when she came back to check on me, I memorized it. Even the sound of her keys jingling when she entered the house later, the way she tapped her foot when impatient, the subtle twitch in her voice when she thought no one was listening. I smiled faintly to myself. They all believed I was trapped, confined to this bed, dependent and vulnerable. But real freedom, the kind that lets you pull strings behind the scenes, doesn't require mobility. It requires patience, calculation, and the ability to be invisible until the moment strikes. By nightfall, the ward was quiet. My sister hadn't returned yet. I imagined her walking through the corridors, laughing at the idea that she had won today, and yet, as I traced her earlier movements in my mind, I noticed tiny cracks in her confidence, an overconfidence that would be her downfall. I reached for the small notebook I had tucked under my pillow, scribbling down the events from the day not as a diary but as a blueprint. Every word she spoke, every glance, every careless gesture became a potential piece of the puzzle. The storm was not a single act of vengeance. It was a slow, inevitable unraveling, a chain reaction she could not see coming. A soft knock startled me. I barely moved my head, letting the shadows in the corner of the room grow longer as she stepped in. She didn't notice me smiling faintly under the covers, the faint flicker of steel in my eyes. "I thought you'd be asleep," she said, tilting her head like she was amused. I didn't answer. I let her speak. Let her brag, taunt, and assume dominance. Every word, every laugh fed the strategy I had been weaving silently for weeks. Patience was my weapon, calm was my shield. And now she was stepping willingly into my map of calculated chaos. She walked closer, unaware of the way I had traced her movements mentally, the path she took, the objects she always touched first, the little habits she believed were invisible. I studied her from the corner of my eye, every flick of her hair, every shift in weight a clue, a trigger for later. "You think lying here makes you mysterious," she said, leaning over me. Her voice was sharp, testing me. "But you're weak. Always have been." I let the words settle, like dust in a silent room. Then I exhaled slowly, a calmness that made her frown slightly. "Maybe," I whispered, soft and almost vulnerable, but it was a trap. The words were bait. She didn't know I was smiling under my calm, plotting the inevitability she would one day realize too late. She left eventually, slamming the door just slightly too hard, leaving a crack of sound that echoed in the hallway. I listened to the echo, letting it sink into my mind like a heartbeat I could follow in the dark. Each footstep, each sound, each tiny mistake would be cataloged, remembered, and used. Every action she thought was harmless was a thread I could pull, each one inching me closer to the moment I controlled. I turned my head toward the monitor, now silent, and traced the cord with my fingers, the memory of her tug still fresh. A plan was forming in the quiet recesses of my mind. Not impulsive, not emotional, but precise. I would wait. I would let her mistakes stack, let her arrogance blind her, let her believe she was untouchable. And then, when the time came, she would never see it coming. But not tonight. Not now. I closed my eyes again, a calm veil over the storm I carried inside. Outside the night was silent, but inside me the clock was ticking, the strategy unfolding, every minute bringing me closer to the inevitable reckoning. The ward was quiet, but my mind never stopped. Every sound, every flicker of the fluorescent lights, every distant murmur of the night shift nurses became part of the tapestry I was weaving. I could almost hear her voice in my head, laughing, taunting, thinking she had broken me. But she had no idea how carefully I had been planning, how every detail she overlooked became ammunition, how her arrogance, her careless overconfidence, was the perfect trap. I had watched her for weeks, memorized her routines, noted her habits, cataloged her weaknesses. And now, confined to this bed, I had the clarity and focus I had never had before. I glanced at the small tray table next to my bed. The items on it seemed harmless: water, tissues, a pen, a notebook. But in my mind, each one was a tool, a potential move in a game she didn't even know she was playing. I traced the edges of the tray with my fingers, thinking of the tiny ways I could manipulate her perception, the subtle psychological nudges that would make her crumble when the time came. Hours passed, the night deepening, and I imagined her alone at home, unaware of the quiet storm building behind my calm demeanor. She believed she could dominate me, that my sickness made me weak, that my silence was a surrender. She didn't realize that silence was my weapon, my shield, my preparation. Every whispered insult she thought I couldn't hear, every eye roll she believed I didn't notice, every careless step she took, all of it was part of the blueprint I was drafting in my mind. I pressed my hand lightly against the bed sheets, closing my eyes and picturing her face, smug, confident, untouchable. And I let myself smile faintly. Not a triumphant smile, not one of rage, but a smile of patience. The kind that knows the storm is coming, but the storm waits for the perfect moment. A faint sound made me open my eyes. Someone was entering the corridor, slow steps, careful but deliberate. My heart rate remained steady, my face calm. The door opened and it was her. She stepped in, carrying a bag, her hair slightly messy, her eyes darting around as if she were searching for signs of weakness. She didn't notice the way I watched her from the shadows, the way I tracked every small movement, every subtle expression. "You look better than I thought," she said, smirking. Her voice was a mix of mockery and surprise. I didn't respond. I let her talk, letting her arrogance spill out, letting her underestimate me as she always did. Each word, each laugh, each careless gesture was recorded in my mind, stored for later. I could almost see the invisible lines connecting her movements, her words, her thoughts, and how I could pull them one by one when the time was right. She set the bag down, pacing the small room, oblivious to the storm contained within me. I leaned back, pretending to rest, letting my eyelids flutter like a fragile veil hiding the steel beneath. "You're always so dramatic," she said, shaking her head. "Even here, even like this, you try too hard to be mysterious." I smiled faintly under my breath. I whispered, soft and calm. The words sounded like surrender, but they were bait, a trap she couldn't resist. She leaned closer, curiosity and arrogance written all over her face. For a moment she paused, tilting her head, and I could see it, the tiniest flicker of doubt, a crack in her confidence she would never admit. That crack, however small, was all I needed. I cataloged it, remembered it, stored it like a precious jewel in my mind. Hours passed. She finally left, the door clicking shut with a slightly heavier sound than usual, and I sat there in the quiet, the calm before the storm. Every heartbeat, every breath, every silent second was part of the plan. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful yet. I was patience I knew was far deadlier than rage. Outside, the night was still. Inside, I traced the edges of the room with my eyes, imagining every future move, every moment of leverage I would have over her. I could feel the inevitability of it, the slow, deliberate unfolding of what she had no idea was coming, and in the deepest part of my mind, a quiet promise formed. Not tonight, not yet. But soon, very soon, everything she thought she knew about me would change forever. The next morning arrived quietly, wrapped in the soft hum of machines and distant footsteps. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, cutting the room into pale lines and shadows. I opened my eyes slowly, as if waking from a fragile sleep, but my mind had never rested. It was sharper than ever. A nurse entered, checked my vitals and smiled gently, telling me everything looked stable. I thanked her in a weak voice, lowering my gaze at just the right moment. People trust what looks fragile. They relax around it, they speak too freely. Not long after she left, I heard my sister's voice in the hallway, confident, loud, careless. She was joking with someone, probably telling a version of the story where she was the hero and I was the burden. I let my breathing slow, my face settle into calm neutrality. When she walked in, she paused for a second, scanning me like she was trying to read something unfamiliar. "You're quiet today," she said, setting her phone down near the bed. "So are you," I replied softly. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. She laughed, brushing it off, but I saw it again, that flicker. That tiny hesitation she didn't even realize she showed. She sat down, scrolling through her phone, half present, half bored. I watched her reflection in the dark screen of the TV across the room, noting how often she checked her messages, how her smile changed depending on who she was talking to. People reveal everything when they think no one is paying attention. Minutes passed. She started talking about herself as always. Her plans, her frustrations, her certainty that life was finally bending her way. I listened, nodding occasionally, saying just enough to keep her going. The more she spoke, the more careless she became, and the more threads she handed me without realizing it. At one point, she stood up and walked toward the window, turning her back to me. "You know," she said casually, "some people just don't have the strength to survive on their own." I almost smiled. Instead, I stayed silent. Silence makes people uncomfortable. It forces them to fill the space. She turned around, searching my face, trying to provoke a reaction. When she didn't get one, she scoffed and grabbed her phone again. "I'll be back later," she said, already halfway to the door. I watched her leave, memorizing the rhythm of her steps, the way she always rushed when she thought she was in control. As soon as the door closed, my gaze shifted to the phone she had left behind on the chair. Just for a second. just long enough to note the cracked corner of the screen, the faint vibration of incoming notifications she didn't hear. I looked away, patience. Later that day, visitors came and went. Doctors spoke in careful tones. Family members whispered sympathy and concern. Through it all, I played my role perfectly, quiet, grateful, unassuming. No one noticed how often people leaned closer to me when they thought I was weak. No one noticed how much information they shared when they assumed I had no power to use it. By evening, my sister returned again, her mood darker this time. Something had clearly gone wrong in her world. She paced the room, agitated. Talking more sharply than before, I could feel the shift. Pressure does that to people, it exposes the cracks they work so hard to hide. She stopped suddenly and looked at me. "What are you staring at?" "Nothing," I said calmly. "About what?" "About how people change when they're afraid." I replied, still gentle, still quiet. She frowned, unsettled. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavier, tighter, like a wire pulled too far. Then her phone buzzed in her hand and she broke eye contact, distracted once more. I leaned back against the pillow, closing my eyes, letting the tension sit where it was. The pieces were aligning slowly. Quietly, inevitably, she still believed I was powerless. She still believed she was in control, and that belief was exactly what would undo her. But not yet. Not until every piece was in place. The next few days blurred together in the quiet rhythm of the hospital. I watched my sister closely, learning her moods, her habits, the way she unconsciously revealed herself when she thought no one was paying attention. Every glance, every sigh, every careless word became a thread I filed away in my mind. She was getting restless. The more she visited, the more she tried to provoke me, to expose weakness, to force a reaction. She laughed louder, moved faster, and spoke sharper, but I remained calm, measured. Silence had become my armor, patience my weapon. One evening, she brought me a cup of tea, fumbling slightly, spilling a few drops on the tray. "Careful," I said softly. "You're making a mess." My tone was almost playful, almost innocent, but it struck her differently. She froze just for a fraction of a second before smiling awkwardly. That tiny pause, so brief, was a crack in her armor. I noted it carefully. Then she began talking about herself again, as she always did. Stories of her day, her successes, her trivial complaints. She didn't realize that her overconfidence, her constant need to be seen, was giving me everything I needed. Every word, every brag, every slip became a weapon I could use later. I stayed silent for most of it, letting her dominate the space, letting her believe she was safe. At one point, she leaned closer, her face inches from mine. "You really think you're stronger than you look?" she asked, teasing, trying to unnerve me. I didn't flinch. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let my eyes meet hers, steady, calm. "Yes," I finally said, quiet but certain. "Stronger than you'll ever understand." Her smile faltered for just a heartbeat. Then she laughed, dismissing it, but I had seen it. That hesitation, that flicker of doubt, was exactly what I wanted. I leaned back, letting the calm spread across my face, hiding the storm beneath. Later that night, the ward was almost empty. The hum of machines and distant footsteps filled the silence. I lay in my bed, tracing the outline of the room in my mind. Every object, every corner, every shadow became part of my plan. The notebooks, the pens, the cups she had brought, each one a potential tool. Each one a piece in a puzzle she couldn't even imagine. I closed my eyes, recalling every interaction from the past days. Every word she had spoken, every careless gesture, every arrogant glance. Every detail was fuel for the storm I was preparing. I could feel the slow, deliberate unfolding of what was coming, the inevitability of it. And I let it calm me, steady me, sharpen me. The next morning, she arrived earlier than usual, her face pale, her hands fidgeting. Something had clearly happened outside these walls. She didn't notice the way I observed her, memorizing the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers tapped nervously on the railing, the slight tremor in her voice when she greeted me. She placed a folder on the table beside my bed. I thought you should see this," she said, uneasy. She expected me to react. Shock, panic, weakness, but I only tilted my head slightly, curious, calm. "Interesting," I murmured, flipping through the pages slowly. I let my eyes linger on the images, the words, the connections she hadn't realized I was seeing. And all the while, she watched me, growing more uneasy with every passing second, as if sensing a presence she couldn't name. Her confidence was cracking. The cracks were subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but I saw them. Every twitch, every hesitation, every word she spoke that didn't come out right, I stored them, like threads to pull at just the right time. Hours passed. She stayed longer than usual, pacing, speaking more nervously, trying to regain control, trying to dominate the room again. But the room was mine. My calm, my silence, my patience, all of it had shifted the balance. I wasn't the one trapped. She was. Finally, she left, slamming the door a little harder than before. I let her go, listening to the echo fade down the corridor. I leaned back against the pillows, eyes closed, feeling the tension settle in the room. Every day, every visit, every small slip she made brought me closer to the inevitable moment. And in that quiet, I reminded myself, not yet. The storm is coming. She doesn't know it, but she is walking directly into it. The following days passed like a shadow creeping across a wall, slow, unnoticed, inevitable. My sister's visits became more frequent, her presence louder, her gestures sharper. She was trying to assert control to dominate the space, but with each step she took she left tiny openings, small slips that I catalogued silently. I watched her closely, memorizing every habit, every twitch, every subtle flaw she didn't even know she had. The way she tapped her fingers when impatient, the way she held her cup of coffee when nervous, the precise tone she used when she wanted to sound confident, but was actually doubting herself. Each one became a thread I could pull, a lever I could use later. One evening she brought a bag of her favorite snacks and set them on the table beside me. "You'll probably not touch them," she said, smirking. "But I thought you should have something." I smiled faintly. "Thank you," I murmured, picking one up, pretending to examine it with mild curiosity. I let her think she was generous, that she had power, that she could placate me. In reality, every interaction was a test, every gesture a clue, every word a building block in the structure of her eventual downfall. She lingered, pacing the room, speaking about herself, her day, her small victories. I nodded occasionally, letting her dominate the space, letting her spill everything she thought was hidden. People reveal far more than they intend when they believe someone else is weak, when they believe the other is powerless. At one point, she leaned over my bed, tilting her head. "You really think you can come back from all this?" she asked, a challenge in her voice. I kept my expression calm, neutral, almost fragile. "Maybe," I said softly, letting my words hover like a whisper, uncertain but deliberate. "Maybe not. But some things you can't control." Her smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. She didn't see it, or at least, she didn't admit it. That hesitation was a crack in her confidence. A subtle weakening that I logged in my mind. Patience, observation, precision. These were my weapons, sharper than any anger she could imagine. Later, as the word emptied, I noticed her phone lying near the edge of the table, slightly tilted, the screen glowing faintly. She hadn't noticed it as she left briefly to speak with a nurse. I didn't touch it, didn't even move, but I studied it, imagining all the ways it could be used, all the ways it revealed her routines, her habits, her vulnerabilities. Each detail was a tool, each pattern a strategy. When she returned, her mood was darker, tense. She moved faster, spoke louder, tried harder to dominate, to fill the space with her presence. I remained calm, quiet, and focused, letting her expend energy while I absorbed every detail. The storm inside me grew stronger with each slip she made, each overconfident gesture. She sat down finally, exhaling sharply, her gaze flicking around the room, uncertain. You're not reacting," she said, a hint of frustration creeping into her voice. I tilted my head slowly, letting my calm, deliberate silence answer her instead. Silence unnerves people, it forces them to fill the space, to reveal more than they intend. I let it stretch, letting her internal tension rise, letting her think she was in control while I catalogued her every thought, every weakness, every misstep. Hours passed. She finally left again, the door clicking softly behind her. I leaned back, eyes closed, feeling the calm settle in the room like a tide. Each visit, each careless word, each small crack in her composure brought me closer to the inevitable. I could feel it forming in the air around us, the slow, deliberate architecture of a plan that would not fail. And as the word settled into silence once more, I reminded myself, not yet. Not tonight, the storm is coming. She is walking blindly into it. She doesn't know it, but every detail she leaves behind, every move she makes, every miscalculation she commits is weaving the thread that will one day unravel her completely. Patience is my weapon, observation is my shield, and the moment I strike she will have no idea it was ever possible. The shift came quietly, the way all irreversible things do. By the time my discharge papers were signed, my sister was already unraveling, though she didn't yet know why. She stood at the foot of my bed, arms crossed, wearing confidence like armor that no longer fit. "Try not to be dramatic out there," she said lightly. "The real world won't be as patient as this place." I smiled, small and sincere, I know. She didn't notice the nurse watching us with careful eyes. She didn't hear the way the doctor paused before saying my name, or how his tone changed when he spoke to me, respectful, measured. She missed all of it. People always miss what they're certain can't hurt them. Outside, the air felt heavier, richer. Freedom sharpened my senses. I let her drive. Let her talk, let her fill the car with her voice while my mind checked the final boxes. The calls had been made, the records requested, the timelines aligned. I had done nothing in haste. Everything had been done the way it should be done, cleanly, quietly, with permission and proof. That evening, she hosted a small gathering. Friends, laughter, the illusion of control. I stayed on the edge of the room, the quiet sibling everyone underestimated. She drank too fast, talked too much, basked in the glow of being admired. When someone asked how I was doing, she laughed. "Oh, you know them. Always fragile." I met her eyes across the room and nodded. Patient. The first interruption came as a knock, firm, official. Conversations faltered. She frowned, annoyed, and went to the door. The color drained from her face as two figures stepped inside, badges catching the light. Papers were presented. Questions asked. Names spoken carefully, precisely, her name. She laughed at first. "There's been a mistake." I didn't move, I didn't need to. They asked about transactions, signatures, messages. They asked about the monitor incident, because hospitals document everything, and witnesses remember more than you think. They asked about patterns, about lies told too often and too loudly. Her eyes found me then, wide and searching. "You did this," she whispered. I tilted my head. No, I said softly. You did. The room seemed to shrink around her. Friends backed away. The story changed hands faster than she could control it. Confidence collapsed into panic. She tried to speak, to explain, to dominate the moment, but the moment no longer belonged to her. As they led her out, she turned once more, fury cracking through fear. You're not strong, she spat. You're just lucky. I met her gaze, steady and unafraid. Strength, I said, quiet enough that only she could hear, is knowing when to wait. The door closed, silence settled like dust. In the days that followed, the truth spread without my help. Records spoke. Patterns revealed themselves. People connected dots she had sworn were invisible. I said nothing. I didn't need to justify anything. The world did that for me. I returned to my life slowly, deliberately. Rebuilt what she had mocked. Reclaimed what she had dismissed. When people asked how I survived, I listened. Weeks later, a letter arrived, angry, desperate, accusatory. I read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it away. Some endings don't require replies at night. When the room is quiet, I sometimes think of the monitor cord, the smirk, the words she thought would finish me. They don't hurt anymore. They remind me I was never weak. I was patient.